Hello and welcome to 2024 Cincinnati Bengals team preview. Healthy Joe Burrow back under center. Will that mean a return to top 7 scoring heights? No more Joe Mixon, Zack Moss, and Chase Brown forming one of the cheaper backfields in fantasy football. And can Jamar Chase and T. Higgins get back to partying like his 2021 and 22 again? All that and so much more. Lock in for the next 30 minutes. We're here with all things on your Cincinnati Bengals. I'm your host, Ian Harditz, and joining me, as always, Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain, The Rock McFarland. And Dwain, again, Bengals coming off a last-place finish, not ideal, but 9-8 record, hardly anything to be overly ashamed of, especially with Joe Burrow starting off the season with the calf injury and then ending it with the wrist surgery that has, again, kept him a little bit limited throughout the offseason, but we are tentatively expecting him to be good to go by week 1. And when Joe Burrow is healthy, man, look out. And we did get to see it for a portion of last year. It really did start about week 5 through week 10, ripped off QB 6, 14, 5, 6, and 8 fantasy performances. And then in terms of the advanced metrics, looked all the way back, 7th in EPA per drop back, 1st in completion percentage over expected, 2nd in passer rating. Again, this is a guy who from 2021 to 22 only averaged fewer fantasy points than Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes. Do you think the 2024 version of Burrow can get back to that sort of standing in Fantasyland?
Absolutely. Obviously, keeping an eye on the risk stuff, it's been pretty well documented. There's a lot of good research out there on it at this point. But it sounds like he's going to have to deal with the pain, but he's already got a plan for how he's going to work through that. But it sounds like there is also a little bit of risk as far as if he falls on it the wrong way. So does he have a little bit of added injury risk? I think that there is some potential for that, but I don't think we need to be overboard. I do think he is one of my favorite values on the board. Now, if you're playing best ball, I don't take him all the time in because it depends. Do I have Jamar Chase or do I have T. Higgins? Occasionally, I'll take him after ADP and set something up with a Jermaine Burton stack later. But if I'm in a home league where I'm not as worried, stacking can still be good, people. We still want to try it.
Yeah.
We don't have to go out of our way to make it happen. But I'm just drafting in a home league and people want to let Joe Burrow fall to the place that he's falling right now in some of these underdog drafts or DraftKings drafts, then I'm going to be buying Joe Burrow in those types of drafts. You already hit on it, the main stuff, but I mean, I'll keep it at a high level here. I mean, this is a lead as far as passing yards per game, Ian, which is the most sticky statistic year over year for quarterbacks outside of completions. But rookie season 269, 288, and then 280. And then last year it was 231. But obviously those first 4 to 5 games, you already mentioned it. He had the calf injury that he was playing through, and he re-aggravated it early in the season in week 1. And he just wasn't the same Joe Burrow. But once we saw him get healthy, he posted those fantasy results that you've already outlined for everyone. So yeah, when I look at Joe Burrow, I think he's an elite quarterback, man. I think he is an arbitrage play on freaking Patrick Mahomes. Like if everything works out right for Joe Burrow, you get Patrick Mahomes and you get him 3 or 4 rounds later in your fantasy draft. So I'm always going to be in on a situation like that. And obviously we love the pass catchers too. So there's just the only concern here is the wrist. And I'm not overly worried about that. Maybe some people more so than me.
Depends on what ADP source you want to look at, but man, I'm pulling up 2023 right now, and he was going pick 34 overall by the end of August last year. He's going right now, guys, pick 90. So yes, I'm fine, admitting that there's probably a little bit more injury upside here, and if you want to ding him a little bit for that, that's fine. But going almost twice as late as Patrick Mahomes and incredulously, Dwain, going 2 rounds later than CJ Stroud, that is, seemingly unwarranted. So even last year, with all the injuries, man, Burrow only had 1 fewer top 8 fantasy finish than Stroud, and he actually tied Mahomes and Tua. So again, we saw the heights. 2021, 2022 was fantastic. This passing game was 4th in yards, 2nd in passing touchdowns. And similar to Mahomes, honestly, more rushing upside than Stroud. Like, don't underestimate Burrow giving us some goodness on the ground. 257 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns in 2022. He's my 3rd most drafted quarterback of the offseason thus far, Dwain.
Yeah, love it. All in on Joe Burrow.
Now, Joe Burrow is back, but Joe Mixon is not. He got traded to the Houston Texans shortly after the Bengals decided to sign Zack Moss. So Moss not exactly getting the world's, biggest money here. We're not talking about, a Derrick Henry level deal or anything, but 2 years, $8 million to presumably be a top 2 RB. We just got to figure out if that's going to be the RB1 or RB2 because Chase Brown is around as well. So I will say, shout out to Fantasy Points. Scott Barrett has some really good stats on Moss's fit in an 11 personnel shotgun heavy offense. Last year, the Colts and Bengals easily had the most carries from shotgun with 3 wide receivers on the field, and only Jonathan Taylor averaged more yards per carry from that exact look than Zack Moss. So cousin of Santana Moss and Sonoris Moss, obviously. I think there's some untapped upside here for Zack Moss, Dwain. I mean, we saw him last year in spot starts for Jonathan Taylor, rip off RB10, 5, 34, and 2 finishes. He only trailed Devin Achane, CMC, Jaylen Warren, and James Conner in next-gen stats rushing yards over expected per carry. No, he couldn't get on the field as much as we wanted in Buffalo, but we've seen Devin Singletary, find a way to keep youngins on the bench and even, future teams as well. So thoughts on Zack Moss, who tentatively looks a lot like the goal line back at a minimum for an offense that we do expect to be among the league's top 10 scoring units.
He's replacement level to slightly below replacement level as far as talent goes. I mean, looking at the things that we know running backs are more likely to own year over year, yards after contact, 2.8. Last year, the league average is 2.9. He's been at 3, 2.3, 2.9. So I think we know he is what he is. Missed tackles forced per attempt. League average 17%. He's been slightly above that, 20%, 19%, 19%. So I think he's fine. I don't think he's going to dominate this backfield. I think he'll lead this backfield. And some of it does come down to Chase Brown. I know there were some concerns with the coaching staff. If you look at his film last year, I know people will show you that most of it came down to one play, but he still adds that explosive element if he can manage to get on the field. So I think you're better off with a tandem backfield here. So I'm not projecting all of that workload that Joe Mixon leaves behind going to Zack Moss. Now, I know a lot of people were like, well, Joe Mixon wasn't efficient either, but the coaching staff did trust him. They trusted him in really all situations. So Zack Moss would have to earn that. Now, there is a path to that happening just by Chase Brown blowing it. So yeah. I think it's fine where Zack Moss goes in drafts. You're getting to take probably the likely 1A back in an offense with upside to be a little bit more that we really, in an offense that we really love, that we think is going to score a lot of touchdowns. So those inside the 5 carries, I'm also with you. Not easy to predict year over year, but if I had to predict it, I would say that those are going to go to Zack Moss, not to Chase Brown. So that gives him 10 plus touchdown upside. I will say this is one of those profiles. It's kind of like Mike Davis back in the day. The beauty is right now in best ball, you don't have to take this guy until round 8. You're not having to take him in round 4 of your draft. So it's not like Alexander Madison last year. I do think Zack Moss a little bit better than those other 2 profiles, but still in that same range. So I don't want to be overboard with him.
I will say the difference, though, is that scoring offense. I mean, Zack Moss cannot be good and still fall into the end zone 10 times and be just fine. You can argue Joe Mixon wasn't very good for the large portion of his, at least.
You could argue that and be right.
Yeah, and he still finished as a top 12 fantasy back in each of the past 3 seasons. So I'm with you. I'm not, pounding Zack Moss pause every single time that I get to that, area of the draft. But, we talked about it, Dwain. From freaking the Steelers back, Ramondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, Zamir White, even DeAndre Swift, James Conner. These guys are going after the top 48 wide receivers are gone. So they just naturally kind of that area of running backs lends itself really nicely when you are going with more of a zero or hero RB approach. So yeah, a lot of times I've just kind of looked at them and said, all right, similar-ish volume projections. Who's in the best offense? It does seem like Zack Moss. So let's talk a little bit about Chase Brown, though, more specifically. You referenced, I believe it was against the Colts, just a wide open screen that he took to the house. But hey, showed that explosive ability, and no running back last year actually registered a faster, mile per hour speed with the football in their hands than Chase Brown. So he's got the juice. I mean, small sample size be damned. Number 1 in yards per route run, targets per route run, and yards per reception last season. It would make sense if he is the primary pass down back, if he can get on the field. I mean, honestly, Dwain, this feels to me like expensive Jaleel McLaughlin. Now, maybe they both work out, but just These are the types of running backs who always get hyped in June, July before the pads come on. And I'm just concerned if they can actually be the third down running back. There's already been some, murmurs that, hey, if the Broncos decide to part ways with Samaje Perine, could he come back to Cincinnati and kind of take back over that pass blocking job? Because that's the one unknown here. Because last year, snaps as a pass blocker, Joe Mixon had 71, Travion Williams had 27, Chase Brown only had 8. So how confident are you in Chase Brown actually being a 1B and not being, kind of a distant 2?
I think the talent level of Zack Moss keeps me in. And I also think they're very complementary in nature. I think the other big difference here is Jaleel McLaughlin is a sub 190 pound back. And so we know I'm not saying that doesn't mean a player can't succeed. I've talked about, and if you believe that, then why are you taking Jahmyr Gibbs, at the end of round 1, early round 2? So I think Jaleel McLaughlin definitely flashed some things, but if I'm going more of a traditional route, Chase Brown does at least, this is a 215 pound back.
Yeah.
So I think he's got the size to carry a larger workload just from the pounding that you take. So I think he's appropriately priced ahead of Jaleel McLaughlin. But archetype wise, I agree. You're looking for an explosive player that you hope can get involved in passing downs, and that does match up with Jaleel McLaughlin. I do think, though, that if everything broke right for both of these players, I would lean towards Chase Brown being the guy that would be more likely to handle the bigger workload. And I also think that Javonte Williams is a better player than Zack Moss. I know Javonte was coming off the injury last year. It was a little bit lackluster, but overall, if I look at his first 3 years in the league, a much better player as far as yards after contact, much better player as far as missed tackles forced. So I think those are the tiebreakers. And you already talked about, Ian, this is just a better offense in Cincinnati. So I really think that Chase Brown checks all the boxes that make him a guy that should probably go. I don't know if he should go as far ahead of Jaleel McLaughlin as he is right now. That's probably, I don't have it in front of me, I would guess like a 3-round difference, probably something like that. Maybe they should be a little closer together, but I would lean Chase Brown.
And I will say I was really out on Chase Brown when he was closer to Moss and almost, closer to that kind of pick 100 ADP. Now that he is outside the top 120, outside the top 36 running backs, I'm a bit more inclined to, add him to a couple squads here or there, because mainly it is the realization that this isn't just a one-dimensional scat back where if Zack Moss goes down, there's no way Chase Brown can take over the featured job. I mean, you look at his last season at Illinois, man, this dude had between 19 and 41 rush attempts in every single game, and you already mentioned the size. So, hey, again, still a bit of an unknown about the pass blocking aspect, but when you're going outside the top 36 running backs, you are explosive, you are a pass catcher, and there's enough reason to believe that you can add, that piece, that tool to your toolkit for the season. Yeah, I'm with you there. So talked about the QB, talked about the running backs, but let's face it, 2 big fantasy producers here that are going to cost you the most, Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins. Now, look, in 2021 and 2022, we saw both these guys put up big time numbers. Ja'Marr Chase is the wide receiver 4 in PPR points per game for a career ever. So yeah, he's always going to be the one. But T. Higgins, man, in 21 and 22, wide receiver 12 and then wide receiver 19. And that 2022 season featured 2 or 3 games where he only played a couple snaps. So actually was more like a wide receiver 1 when he was out there on the field. So last season, Higgins, unfortunately, rib and hamstrings injuries again caused him to miss a bit more time than fantasy managers would prefer. But Ravens game, he had 89 yards and 2 tuds. Bills, he went over 100. Steelers, 140 yards and a touchdown. Vikings game, 2 touchdowns as well, one of which was truly one of the best plays of the season. So no more Tyler Boyd. We'll talk about Jermaine Burton in a little bit. But Dwain, I found myself, drafting a lot of Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins pretty much every chance I get here in early drafts.
Yeah, I like them both. I'm gonna, say last season we talked about some of these profiles. T. Higgins was one of them, Terry McLaurin, and they were both guys that I said, these are really wide receiver 3s. Their talent profile says they're wide receiver 3s. It's a little murky, and you guys have heard me talk a lot about this offseason. Fantasy points per game are actually king as far as predicting the next year, and that's where T. Higgins is boom. But this is where you want to pull all the data together, and it's hard for me to say, but I really do think T. Higgins is probably a wide receiver 3 profile. But he gets to play with Joe Burrow in a pass-first offense. Yeah. And that makes him someone that can give you a wide receiver 2 finish. But then you can also argue, and you probably rightfully will, Ian, after I stop talking, but he also plays with Ja'Marr Chase. So he's got intense target competition. So I agree with that as well. So maybe he is a wide receiver 2. I'm saying he's a wide receiver 3. That's where he's going in drafts right now. I don't think this is a 1A, 1B. I think this is Ja'Marr Chase is the 1. I think T. Higgins is the 2, but both of them are priced right in fantasy land right now. And that's the thing we care about the most. So I am willing to take both of them. And we have seen that in the games without Jamar Chase, there has been a higher ceiling for T. Higgins. So if you're a truther of no, T. Higgins is really a wide receiver 1, that's your number 1 bullet you're going to use in your argument back to me. And I don't really have a way to refute it, right? But when I balance it all out, I do believe he looks closer to a high-end wide receiver 3 than that wide receiver 2 we used to think. But again, the market already has it priced right.
Just interesting to me that you look at ADP going into last season and wide receiver 11, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 13, Devonta Smith, wide receiver 14, T. Higgins. These guys that we know are the number 2s in their offenses, but you could argue overqualified number 2s. But then we look at this year, Waddle, wide receiver 15, Devonta, wide receiver 18, slight drops. T. Higgins, though, wide receiver 27. Like, Dwain, I don't disagree. I think T. Higgins, honestly, like, he's so springy right now. I know he took the slant to the house against the Steelers. He's not just a contested catch guy. I do wonder if the fall off eventually, and he's still like 24 or 25, so not happening anytime soon. But I do wonder if he could have that Kenny Golladay, Des Bryant career arc where when the fall off does come in 4 or 5 years, it could come in a hurry. But man, for right now in the year 2024, I'm buying, man. I feel like he's still wide receiver 27 because of all the stuff going on this offseason where we actually saw him, request a trade, and there were, concerns about if he was going to be in Cincy. I mean, just in terms of like wide receivers that have actually had pretty substantial drops, I don't think anything's changed for T. Higgins. If anything, his situation in 2024 is probably better than it was last year, given that we don't have to worry about the Burrow calf injury and given that Boyd's out of the picture.
Well, I think the main thing is T. Higgins is now another year older past, right? He started a year before these other 2 guys. So like everything is on a clock here as far as when we think their big breakout is going to happen. And T. Higgins is further down that path without it happening, just like Terry McLaurin and other guys. So I think he's rightfully going after those guys. And honestly, Jalen Waddle was just a better player than he was last year. I mean, he had a 25% target share or 24% target share in his healthy games. T. Higgins had an 18%. So we can talk about Joe Burrow being out and that impacting the play of T. Higgins, but the fact that he still had an 18% target share never has been able to show that he can earn those targets with another high-end player on the field at a rate similar to Jalen Waddle. I think your argument holds up a little bit more for Devonta Smith, but still another guy with a 24% target share despite playing with A.J. Brown. And so we just haven't seen T. Higgins be able to get to that level despite playing across from an alpha. And so I think the market actually has this right. Another year older, hasn't quite lived at the underlying data points, not quite as high as those other 2 guys, despite them all being in pretty similar situations.
I will say, Dwain, Waddle and Smith are older than T. Higgins. It is crazy that how young Higgins was when he came.
Yeah, 25.8 for Waddle versus 25.7. But we have an extra year in the league for T.
That's fair. So, that's fair. Yeah. A little bit more wear and tear going on there. So we'll see.
I don't think it's wear and tear, to be clear. I think it's another year of seeing him and not in him having continuing to move upward or hit a peak, whereas these other 2 guys have shown a little more.
Again, wide receiver 27. I've been drafting George Pickens a little bit more in that range of drafts. I don't think Higgins is, a ton of a much better pick than guys like Amari Cooper. Or, I definitely would take Tank Dell ahead of him. So not someone I'm taking every single time, I see his name, but certainly someone that, again, I think maybe has a bit higher.
What about him versus Zay Flowers? That's the one I'm often like, I take Pickens over both of those guys. But
I agree.
Zay Flowers, I kind of mix up.
I'll take T, man. I think T, he's the number 2 in his offense, but he's the number 2 of an offense with Joe Burrow vying for the league lead in passing yards, and Flowers is probably going to finish behind Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I coin flip it. Like the other side of it, I think, is what if Zay Flowers was good as a rookie and now he becomes elite in his next year and actually becomes the number 1 on the Ravens offense, which is in the range of outcomes. If I had to say today, I think it's Mark Andrews, but I think that's in the range of outcomes based on what we saw from Zay. So I kind of coin flip those two guys. I think Zay Flowers can end up being the better player long-term, but because of what you said, the offense, that's why I also still go ahead and get my T. Higgins shares, because I would much rather invest in the number 2 with a Joe Burrow-led offense. Nothing against Lamar Jackson, guys, but let's face it, like we're going to project more yards per game for the Bengals passing than we are the Ravens.
As we talked about in our Ravens team preview, the Todd Monken experience still only yielded, the league's 29th ranked offense and pass play rate. with Zack Taylor and specifically Joe Burrow, the Bengals have ranked 7th here over the past 4 seasons. So yes, we did have, Brian Callahan go ahead and take the job with the Titans to be their new head coach, but expecting things to look pretty much the same. Longtime quarterback coach Dan Pitcher is now the OC here for the Bengals. So honestly, Dwain, I just want this offensive line to hopefully be better. I mean, PFF's ranked 26th ranked unit. They do return 4 or 5 starters, and they drafted massive Georgia offensive tackle Armarius Mims. So hopefully things get better. But, any overall thoughts on Zack Taylor utilization? I feel like we should be seeing, again, more of the same here out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think it's more of the same. I don't think Zack Taylor is a very good play caller, to be honest. I think he's spoiled. He has Joe Burrow and he has elite weapons. He needs to do more to make life easier for Joe Burrow right at the snap. We're not using play action. 10% of dropbacks have play action. The league average is 15%. That's stupid. You need to have more play action. 41% shift in motion. We've already talked about how valuable that can be. 56% is the league average. Come on, man. Yeah, Jamar Chase is awesome. Let's freaking put him in motion. And as you like to say, Ian, see what happens. I mean, those are worth 55% more fantasy points per route when you're in motion. Let's give him the same advantage you give a guy like Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, Jesus, Jamar Chase could absolutely be even more dominant. And then you look at the trick play looks, just giving the defense something to pause and be like, what is this? I've not seen this. And that gives the offense a little bit of an advantage right at the snap. 2%. The league is at 7%.
Jeez.
Stop just depending on Joe Burrow to carry everything. I get it. The quarterback has input, and that's something we don't get to see behind the scenes. Maybe Joe Burrow doesn't like any of these things, but maybe you need to sell him on Joe. You're going to like motion. Look what it does for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and all these guys. So I think Zack Taylor is lucky to be in the job that he's in. I think we could be getting even more out of this Bengals offense. So I'm hoping some of those things improve.
I will give Taylor credit for helping Jake Browning put up such good numbers down the stretch, but you dig a little deeper and you see,
did he help him, or the fact that he had the receivers he has?
Receivers, and also, I think we can look at the difference in stats, versus the Jaguars, Colts, and Vikings compared to the Steelers and Chiefs and stuff, and kind of put two.
Don't give Zack Taylor any of that credit. Come on, let's move on.
I'm just laughing at Jake Browning kind of being, we always have these guys when we're trying to do studies. Deontay Hardy over the years was a guy with the Saints where they would almost force you to add a couple targets to your query, so you aren't saying Deontay Hardy is the best player
shows
in the
up.
league.
Yeah.
Jake Browning is that guy now where you can't do 250 dropbacks. You got to do 275 dropbacks just to make sure you're not saying he's a top 5 quarterback. Or maybe he is, guys. Who can know for sure?
I can't believe no one went after him with so many quarterback teams to just give him a shot. So I'll say that.
Even I don't know, just an opener place. I don't know. Quarterback controversy brewing in Cincy, perhaps. Nah, I'm just playing. But who's not just playing? DraftKings Sportsbook, because, they're giving you guys the opportunity to make a hell of a lot of money. Right now, all new customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets instantly. All you got to do is download a DraftKings app now and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. Stay in on the action. Use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same-game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout, and you can combine multiple bets together from the same game and watch the odds skyrocket. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. DraftKings is the one-stop shop for all things daily fantasy, where you can join in on all the fun and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Again, new customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Dwain, this is a team that was capturing the division, with regularity before Burrow got injured. Back-to-back seasons in 2021 and 2022 snapped their 3-year streak of last-place finishes. They are now the second favorite to win the AFC North behind only the Ravens, plus 165, 10.5 win total with a minus 125 lean on the over. And, yeah, man, I'm buying the over. I think last year some of the problems on defense, they allowed more yards per play than anyone else out there, but could have been traced, looking at some of the losses in the secondary with Jesse Bates and Von Bell. I think we've seen enough from Lou Anarumo that, yes, usually a pretty well-coached group. I don't think they're going to go from worst to first or anything like that, but a more average defense with an offense that I do think goes from average to elite once again. Give me over 10.5 wins for a team that, again, as long as number 9 is healthy, I think should be considered, if not the favorite in the division, very, very close, which they are.
Yeah, I like the Bengals to be over this number. I don't know if I'm probably not betting it at minus 125, but I would definitely take the over on it. If I knew Joe Burrow wasn't going to miss any games, and you could say this about any team with the starting quarterback, it's the most important position. I would be all over this. Like, I would have no problem betting it. It's my third highest projected passing offense in the league, behind only the Dolphins and Kansas City. It is my third highest touchdowns that I have projected right now. It wouldn't surprise me if they finish both and first in both of those things. And we know that the elite passing offenses win a lot of games, Ian. I mean, they just do. It's the way it works in the NFL, and they've got a great quarterback surrounded by great weapons. So even if everything else goes crappy, they're still going to have a chance to win 11 games.
Guys, takes us to our position battle. And in this case, it is going to be the wide receiver 3 job. So, yeah, we're expecting the large majority of targets to be funneled to Chase and Higgins. But as we saw with Tyler Boyd over the years, maybe we can get a spike week or two out of the third banana of the picture. So, might be third round pick, number 3 overall pick, 80th overall pick, Jermaine Burton. Now he only fell that far because of some off the field issues. The Georgia-Alabama product was largely great wherever he played at. Elite career targeted passer rating of 115.8. There's also Trenton Irwin, who last year was the next man up when T. Higgins missed time, but not when Jamar Chase missed time later. That was actually then rookie, now second-year wide receiver, Andre Iosivas, a.k.a. Yoshi, former Princeton track star. His relative athletic score, 14th out of over 3,000 wide receivers. So truly an athletic specimen. Dwain, you think there's enough target competition here to, kind of keep Burton rotating, or are you buying the rookie as a starting wide receiver 3 from day one?
I'm just buying in on Burton. I just love the profile. He was one of the first guys that really popped in the wide receiver rookie supermodel this year. He was one of the biggest takeaways once I completed my write-ups around wide receivers. If you go back and look through that, it says, bottom line, just go draft Jermaine Burton right now. And at the time, like, he was going even later in drafts. Now he's landed with the Bengals. There's talks about him being the third wide receiver. So he's moved up, but I still think that he's priced fine. But especially if I get Joe Burrow, I'm trying to tack on Jermaine Burton every time that I can. But it doesn't have to be with Joe Burrow. I draft a lot of Jermaine Burton. This is a guy that can attack the intermediate and deep areas of the field as good as anyone. Yeah, he never had those elite target share numbers, et cetera, in college, but he played at really big programs between Georgia and Alabama, a lot of target competition at those places. But this is a high pedigree player. He was a very highly recruited player coming out of high school, and he's shown that he can give you the big plays. So if anything were to happen, to knock on wood, we never want this to happen, but to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, and both of them, let's be honest, have struggled staying on the field for full seasons each of the last few years, that could open up some contingency upside. And man, if that happens in a week where you're really needing it, suddenly you get a 25-point spike performance out of a guy like Jermaine Burton. Is it a guarantee that he's just going to take over that slot role and they don't rotate? They've got other guys even below him on the depth chart that do different things as a slot player. He is more of a vertical threat. So it'll be interesting to see how it all works out. Right now, I do project him for the third most routes on the team at the wide receiver position. I definitely don't see Mike Gesicki keeping the guy off the field for slot routes, but that is another potential landmine there. So I just want to bet on the talent, though, Ian. I want to go ahead and bet on the talent. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if you're right, it's one of those situations where you can feel pretty good about Jermaine Burton.
Was really easy to, again, take him as a near last round pick, some of these really early drafts. He is starting to get closer to guys like Xavier Leggett and, Jalen Polk, who, no, I am going to go ahead and trust their, higher draft capital and better chances to be the number one in that offense. But yeah, man, if anything happens to Higgins or Chase at any point this year, good chance we see Jermaine Burton, accordingly on the cover of waiver wire articles around the injury. You've already, said a little bit of Mike Gesicki slander, who really is more of a receiver. That man doesn't even celebrate National Tight End Day, for crying out loud. Now, naturally, like in every, tight end room in the league, we are getting some hype about him, being the seam stretcher they've needed. And yeah, Dwain, I think he could go ahead and, lead this Bengals tight end room in targets. But over the last 3 years, all that's resulted in is 63, 68, and 50 targets. Accordingly, your projections only have Gesicki set for 50 total targets. So again, someone that I've been a lot by drafting the late rounds over the years. And if I have Burrow on my team, yes, I'm pulling the trigger on, Gesicki very, very late in drafts, if not literally the last round. But yeah, over under 500 receiving yards, I'd probably take the under.
Yeah, I don't think we can assume that he's very good at this point. Now, he was around a 20% targets per route run guy in his second and third year in Miami. And then the last 2 years, he's been at 14 and 13%. So he has at least flashed that he could be in a tight end one conversation somewhere along the way. And that's always worth something. So I don't want to call him a complete nothing. You're not touching him in a home league right now. I think he's really only an option if you're playing in a best ball league that has 18 to 20 rounds, and you're really only doing it if you're stacking him up with Joe Burrow and you didn't take an elite tight end early.
Takes us to our final section, Dwayne. If the Bengals were a TV or movie character, who would they be? I'm going to go, and I don't feel great about this one, which is a great way to start my spiel. I get it. But I'm going to go with Jimmy from Yellowstone. It's an underdog story, and this is going back to Burrow's time where he couldn't beat out Dwayne Haskins for his starting job at Ohio State. Had an injury during the battle, but then he goes to LSU, and we forget how mediocre he really was during that first year. But then all of a sudden, things got going, whether it was Jimmy, winning a bull riding comp, or more realistically, going to Texas and actually learning what it means, work on a ranch and everything. Things got special in a hurry. Healthy, finally, and back in action. Didn't break actually, he did break like every bone in his body, but then was able to go back, get back to doing his thing. Are we finally going to see something special? So sadly, because it looks like Yellowstone's getting canceled, I don't think we're ever going to find out with Jimmy, but healthy Burrow. We got the weapons. It looks like, they're going to have to pay Jamar Chase and maybe, but probably not T. Higgins soon. I don't want to say it's one last dance. I think Burrow said himself, like, we're always contenders as long as I'm here and everything. But Bengals, I know you guys were so close to getting that Super Bowl a couple years ago. This team, I do think, has the expectations to do so again, and for good reason.
Man, once again, you set me up with a nice segue. The lead character in Yellowstone being Kevin Costner, which was the lead character in the film that challenged the one I'm about to talk to you about, but he was Wyatt Earp. So the other show about Wyatt Earp, though, was called Tombstone, and Kurt Russell played Wyatt Earp, but Doc Holliday was played by Val Kilmer. And I'm going with Doc Holliday because we're talking about Joe Burrow. This is Joe Cool. If you ever watch Tombstone, man, Doc Holliday is so chill, even though he's about to go into a freaking gunfight. In fact, he gets everyone else around him so nervous, including Patrick Mahomes. This is Burrow looking at Doc Holliday. They would literally make him carry a shotgun just so the other people wouldn't be worried about him, like quick drawn, and just start blowing everybody away, just to maybe try to diffuse the situation. So yeah, we're talking about a guy with ice through his veins that can perform in the biggest moments on the biggest stages, and that's Joe Burrow. He's back. He's healthy. Bengals win the division. Give me Doc Holliday from Tombstone.
And I had to apologize to Dwayne before the show because
he hasn't seen the show, guys. Come on.
I am so sorry. I'm sorry to all of you out there as well. I will literally watch the film and then accordingly get better from that.
We'll do a review.
Yeah, that's it on your Cincinnati Bengals, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in as always. And I am with Dwayne. I do think they go ahead and get back to business and capture that AFC North crown. But loaded division, we will see what happens. But make sure you check out my written preview of the Bengals on FantasyLife.com. All 32 teams there for your viewing. Also, Dwayne's projections and our Fantasy Life Consensus Ranks. Always a great day to be great over at FantasyLife.com. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Podcast. Until next time, take care, everybody.